Hey guys, welcome to part 3 of our series on revival. Today we are talking about doing revival God's way. It only works when it's God's way, no matter how much our way might look like God's way. Does that make any sense? Hopefully I can try to explain it in the next 5 or 6 minutes. Here's a quick story. When I first went to Taiwan, I'm from Atlanta, Georgia, and I went to Taiwan and China as a missionary right after college. I stayed there for 7 years. When I first went there, I was 22 years old. I was serving in a small town at that time. It's kind of become a big town now, 16 years later, but a small town at that time outside of Taipei, right outside of Taipei in Taipei County. And I was serving in what was a smaller church on the smaller side. Now it's a pretty large church in Taiwan. And the church and that pastor had never really had, certainly a long-term missionary, never had a long-term missionary before, and I'd never been a long-term missionary before. How do you like that combination? But when I first got there, and I might have told some of you this story before, but I had a website called GoChangeTheWorld.com. I was on fire for God, but only in my way. I thought I knew everything, as many who were 22 do, the concept in my head was the crazier you are for God. For example, getting on your knees on the sidewalk on a very busy street in downtown Taipei with your headphones on, with your arms raised in the air and screaming, singing out loud worship songs. Only when you are super crazy, quote unquote, as I see it, on fire for God, are you going to really have, earth shifting, world history changing impact on the people around you. And that's what I thought at that time. And of course, the pastor there at that time, and he's still the same pastor today, was twice my age, maybe more, but twice my age. Of course, he was Taiwanese, and I was from Atlanta, Georgia, and we were in Taiwan. And he knew the better way. I mean, it just makes sense, right? That he would know the better way. But I thought it made sense that he would not know the better way. Like, he was too close to the situation. He didn't have a real perspective. He didn't have that fresh, young person perspective. I thought I knew everything. Here's the point, my intentions, I think for the most part, maybe not in my subconscious, but whatever, that's psychology. The point is, generally my intentions were good and right. I raised enough money to pay my way, to pay my salary, to go there, and I was on fire for God, and I was so excited about God. I was spending hours with God on my own, in devotion every day, and I was hungry, and I was hungry for other people to know Him too, and I couldn't wait, and they all had to know Him. And this whole video is not a big knock on me for getting it all wrong or something like that. I'm sure there's some things I got right, and I learned through it, and it's all cool. But here's the point. The intentions were good. Generally, it might have looked a little crazy sometimes, but it certainly would look to somebody like I was on fire for God, right? But the problem is I was under His authority, and there's a right way to do things and a right way to honor Him and a right way to respect Him and wrong ways for all those things. And for the most part, I chose wrong ways, right? And once again, not wrong ways that were like major sin, just wrong ways like I was going to do this my way. Now, we're talking about revival this week. Look at 2 Samuel chapter 6. 2 Samuel chapter 6. This is so clearly a parallel to what I just told you in my story. David is now king of Israel. He's firmly established. He's, I'm sure, giving a lot of glory to God, but probably struggling with some ego and some pride. And he's done really well. And he decides he's going to get the Ark of the Covenant, the presence of God, the heartbeat of the nation, back to Jerusalem. It says in chapter 6, verse 1 of 2 Samuel that he gathered all the elite troops in Israel, 30,000 in all. He was going to lead the Ark back on this cart, this new cart they'd made. And along the way, it says in verse 5, David and all the people of Israel celebrated before the Lord, singing songs, playing all kinds of musical instruments, and it lists different instruments. And they were just going crazy for God. So imagine this, 30,000 of Israel's elite troops, all right? They probably put on the nicest clothes they had, their little uniforms. They were the best of the best of the best. They gave, this day, this time, they prepared all to just, ushering in the presence of God back to Jerusalem. They gave him the most honor that they could think of to give him. They built a new cart. Okay, and maybe a cart nowadays, anybody has one, but back then probably the more wealthy had carts. So we're going to bring you in on a cart, it's a newfangled thing, or maybe carts have been around for a while. But the point is, back then, we're going to bring you in the nicest way we know how, right? It's like if you tried to, bring him in today in a stretch limousine, Hummer edition or something like that, right? And then they're singing and dancing and going crazy. Imagine if your church is packed to the max. It's full of people. People are waving their hands in the air. They're singing. They're shouting. They've got tears streaming down their face. They are so going for it for God. They're worshiping God with all they've got in every way they know how. And then on the way back, the ark slips and somebody reaches out his hand to try to steady it, all good intentions. God kills him. God kills other people. God's angry. They did it the wrong way. And here's the point, whether intentional or not intentional. David tried to usher in the presence of God his way, not God's way. God had made it clear to use poles. They built the ark so that you could put these wood poles, on each side of it. And so you'd have two guys in the front, two guys in the back, carrying these poles. You weren't supposed to put it on a cart. You were supposed to put it on poles. Instead of paying attention to that little detail, he pays attention to the 30,000 elite troops probably having all their hair in the right place, right? And all their clothes need to be pressed and shiny and pretty. And everybody needs to dance and sing as loud as possible. The point is, you could have every great intention in the world, but the biggest show in the world, the biggest show that your church can conjure up, the louder you can sing in your quiet time with God, the harder you can pray with all your might. Not to say don't go for it. I'm not saying don't do something with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength as you love him, right? But it's not that God comes because we try to impress him. We don't honor him by impressing him. We honor him by obeying him and loving him. We don't respect and honor him by putting on a show. He's not an egomaniac, okay? He's very satisfied in himself. He's very confident, right? He is not in desperate need of our adoration, right? But we are in desperate need of his presence. And that comes by ushering it in, by inviting him in, and by connecting and meeting with him his way. So the point I'm making today as we talk about revival is, as we yearn for more of God, as we yearn to know more of God, as we yearn to meet with him face to face as Moses did, as we yearn to see him and hear from him and even have a tangible touch of him, as we yearn just to read our Bibles and be comforted in peace, I want you to know it's not through the harder work that you do, but it's just through his grace that allows you to obey in the little things as much as the big, to know he loves you and to love him back. And in that moment and in that place and in that mindset of doing things his way, more important than anything else, that's when God shows up. Not when we put on the show, we honor him and respect him as he's asked us to do. All right, guys, look forward to talking to you in part 4.